And now the news in details. Ghana's finance ministry has urged the president not to sign a controversial anti-LGBTQ bill passed by Parliament last week. It warns the country could lose a total of $3.8 billion in World Bank funding over the next 5 to 6 years. The bill prescribes 3 years in jail for identifying as LGBT+ and 5 years for promoting LGBT+ activities. Ghana is suffering a major economic crisis and last year had a bailout from the International Monetary Fund. There are concerns that any shortfall in funding from the World Bank and other donors could derail the economic recovery in a highly unusual move. The warning from the Finance Ministry was leaked to several media, including the press. It recommends that President Nana Akufo-Addo defer signing the bill until the Supreme Court rules on whether it aligns with the Constitution. Human rights group went to court even before it was passed by Parliament, but it is unlikely to be heard by the Supreme Court for some time. Ghana's president has 7 days after receiving the bill to decide whether to sign into law, and if he doesn't, 14 days to give reasons. Although the Proper Human Sexual Rights and Ghanaian Family Values bill was passed by Parliament last Thursday, it has not yet been sent to the president for his assent. Mr. Akufo-Addo is reported to be holding meetings with key ministries and donors to assess the impact of the Proper Human Sexual Rights and Ghanaian Family Value Bill. The US, UK and Human Rights Group have already condemned the bill, which was backed by both of Ghana's two main political parties. The South African Navy was brought in Monday to help with a search for a 6-year-old girl who has been missing for 2 weeks in a case that has captured national attention, forcing police to ask people to give them space to work and stop encroaching on the operation and recording it on their cell phones. Jocelyn Smith went missing on February 19th in the Saldanha Bay area on South Africa's west coast, about 120 kilometers north of Cape Town. Police, firefighters and specialized K9 dog units have scoured sand dunes and scrubland near the informal settlement of shacks and small houses where Jocelyn lived. Search teams have used drones to view large areas of ground, police said, and personnel from a South African Navy base in Saldanha Bay have now bolstered the operation. A team of top detectives was sent to Cape Town to lead the investigation. Community members have also been involved in the search. Some of them claimed this weekend to have found a knife and girls' clothing stained with blood, which they said they handed over to the police. Police said they had sent items found during the search to a laboratory for forensic examination, but didn't give further details. They pleaded with the public to desist from recording the searches as interest in the case spiked following news that the bloody clothing had been found. People taking photos and videos of officers working may adversely impact the investigation, police spokesperson Brigg Novella Potalwa said, urging members of the public to keep their distance. A photo of Jocelyn with her smiling face, bright green eyes, and hair neatly plaited in pigtails has been widely published, evoking sympathy, anger, and fear that the little girl may be another example of South Africa's appallingly high level of crime against children. People say that she just vanished. No, people do not just vanish, said Theresa LaRousse, a local government official. Everybody sees something, whether it is stuck in your mind and you forget about it and later you remember. But somebody must have seen her somewhere. Somebody must have seen who she was with. Police Minister Becky Cele met with Jocelyn's family on Saturday and pleaded for calm among local residents after anger erupted over the young girl's disappearance. Jocelyn's mother, Kelly Smith, said she and her boyfriend were kept at a police station for their own protection after angry neighbors blamed them for not watching over the child. Police did not comment on that, but Saleh asked the community to remain calm amid the finger pointing. Smith, the mother, said she asked her boyfriend to look after Jocelyn when the young girl felt unwell and didn't go to school on the day she disappeared. The boyfriend, Jacquin Apollos, said he lost track of where Jocelyn was and she was missing by the time her mother came back from work. A UN team has concluded there are reasonable grounds to believe sexual violence, including rape and gang rape, was committed during the Hamas attacks in Israel on October 7th. They also said there was convincing information that hostages had been subjected to sexual violence. The trip was led by Pramila Patten, the UN Special Representative on Sexual Violence and Conflict. Hamas has denied its gunmen sexually assaulted women during the attacks. The mission team found that there are reasonable grounds to believe that conflict-related sexual violence occurred in multiple locations during the 7 October attacks, the UN report said. These happened in at least 3 locations: the Nova Music Festival site and its surroundings, Road 232 and Kibbutz Reim, it added. Hamas gunmen infiltrated southern Israel on 7 October, killing about 1,200 people and taking 253 others hostage. Israel responded by launching a military campaign in Gaza, during which 30,500 people had been killed, according to the Hamas-run health ministry. Reports of sexual violence carried out by Hamas, which is prescribed as a terrorist organization by Israel, the UK and others, began to emerge soon after 7 October and have accumulated steadily ever since. 3 cables under the Red Sea that provide global internet and telecommunications have been cut as the waterway remains a target of Yemen's Houthi rebels, officials said Monday. Meanwhile, a Houthi missile attack set a ship ablaze in the Gulf of Aden, but caused no injuries. What cut the lines remains unclear. There has been concerns about the cables being targeted in the Houthi campaigns, which the rebels describe as an effort to pressure Israel to end its war on Hamas in the Gaza Strip. The Houthis have denied attacking the lines. However, while global shipping has already been disrupted through the Red Sea, a crucial route for cargo and energy shipments from Asia and the Middle East to Europe, the sabotage of telecommunication lines could further escalate the month-long crisis. The cut lines include Asia, Africa, Europe, the Europe-India Gateway, CECOM and TGN Gulf Hong Kong base HGC. Global Communications said it described the cuts as affecting 25% of the traffic flowing through the Red Sea. It described the Red Sea route as crucial for data moving from Asia to Europe and said it had begun rerouting traffic. HGC Global Communications described the CECOM TGN Gulf line as being 2 separate cables when it is actually one at the area of the cut. According to Tim Strunge, a subsea cable expert with Telegeography, a Washington-based telecommunications market research company, responding to questions from pressmen, CECOM said that initial testing indicates the affected segment lies within Yemeni maritime jurisdictions in the southern Red Sea. It said it was rerouting the traffic that it was able to change, though some services were down. Tata Communications, part of the Indian conglomerate and behind the CECOM TGN Gulf line, told AP that it initiated immediate and appropriate remedial actions after the line was cut. We invest in various cable consortiums to increase our diversity, and hence in such a situation, to cut our cable will automatically reroute our services, he said. China has set an ambitious growth target of around 5% for this year, as it outlines a series of measures aimed at boosting its flagging economy. Premier Li Xiang made the announcement at the opening of the annual National People's Congress on Tuesday. Mr. Li acknowledged that China's economic performance had faced difficulties, adding that many of these had yet to be resolved. It comes as China struggles to reinvigorate its once booming economy. Risk and potential dangers in real estate, local government debt, and small and medium financial institutions were acute in some areas. He said, under these circumstances, we face considerably more dilemmas in making policy decisions and doing our work. Series of other measures to help tackle the country's slow recovery from the pandemic were also announced, including the development of new initiatives to tackle problems in the country. Crisis hits property sector. Beijing also aims to add 12 million jobs in urban areas. Regulation of financial markets will also be increased, said Premier Li, while research will be stepped up in new technologies. including artificial intelligence and life sciences. Along with measures to boost the economy, defense spending will be increased by 7.2% this year. Beijing's defense budget is closely watched by its neighbors and the U.S. due to concerns over its intentions as tensions remain high over Taiwan. For decades, the Chinese economy expanded at a stellar rate, with official figures putting its gross domestic product growing at an average of close to 10% a year. Chinese and Philippine Coast Guard vessels collided in the South China Sea on Tuesday in the two nations' latest confrontation over the disputed waters, as Southeast Asian leaders gathered for a summit in Australia where alarm over Beijing's aggression at sea was expected to be raised. The Chinese Coast Guard ships and accompanying vessels blocked the Philippine vessels off a disputed shoal and executed dangerous maneuvers that resulted in the minor collision between a Chinese Coast Guard ship and one of two Philippine Coast Guard vessels. Philippine Coast Guard spokesperson Commodore J. Toriles said the BRP Sindangan had major structural damage, Toriles said, without providing other details. Toriles' post on the X platform did not say where the confrontation took place, but the military earlier said the Navy was delivering supplies and fresh personnel to the Philippine-occupied Second Themis Shoal, the site of several tense skirmishes between Chinese and Philippine Coast Guard ships and accompanying vessels last year. The Philippine Coast Guard ships were escorting Navy personnel who were aboard two civilian supply boats, one of which was hit by water cannon blast by the Chinese. Philippine military spokesperson Commodore Roy Vincent Trinidad said, adding it was not immediately clear if any crew member was injured or if the boat was damaged. Throughout the operation, the Philippine Coast Guard vessels faced dangerous maneuvers and blocking from Chinese Coast Guard vessels and Chinese maritime militia. Toriles said their reckless and illegal actions led to a collision. The Chinese Coast Guard said in a statement that it took control measures in accordance with the law against Philippine ships that illegally intruded into the waters adjacent to Ranai Reef, the name Beijing uses for Second Themis Shoal. A Chinese Coast Guard spokesperson said Philippine ship deliberately rammed a Chinese Coast Guard vessel, causing a minor scratch. The long-simmering territorial disputes in the South China Sea are expected to be discussed at a summit of leaders of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations and their Australian counterpart in Melbourne. Ahead of Wednesday's summit, Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. said in a forum in the Australian city that his administration will do whatever it takes to manage any threat to his country's territory, but stressed that Manila will continue to tread the path of dialogue and diplomacy in resolving disputes with China. Philippine security officials have accused the Chinese Coast Guard and suspected militia ships of blocking Philippine vessels and using water cannons and a military-grade laser that temporarily blinded some Filipino crewmen in a series of high-sea confrontations last year. The Chinese embassy in Manila accused the Philippines of frequent provocative moves in the South China Sea and said China acted in accordance with law to defend its own sovereignty, rights and interests. The confrontation has sparked fears of a larger conflict that could involve the United States. At least 35 people died while dozens more were injured as freezing rain and unexpected snowfall hit remote areas of Pakistan over the weekend. 22 children were among the fatalities, many of whom were crushed in landslides that buried their homes, disaster management authorities said. The extreme weather hit Pakistan's northern and western regions, clogging roads and damaging hundreds of houses. Experts were surprised by the snow, as Pakistan is typically humid in March. Mushtaq Ali Shah, a former director of the country's meteorological department, attributed the unusual condition to climate change. He added that a light hail storm that lasted for a few moments would not be as surprising, but it is unusual for that to continue for over 30 minutes. The heavy rain completely destroys at least 150 houses and partially damaged 500 others, mostly in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and the southwestern Balochistan province, authorities said. Electricity has been completely cut off in some districts for several days. Khyber Pakhtunkhwa's provincial government has provided relief supplies to affected areas and announced financial assistance for the injured and the families of those who died. Pakistan's meteorological department said in its weekly forecast that mainly cold and dry weather is expected in most parts of the country for the rest of this week, Although some parts of Balochistan and Kashmir should expect to see snowfall over hills. A court in India has acquitted a disabled academic and 4 others, serving life sentences for allegedly having links to Maoist rebels. Jian Sai Baba, who is paralyzed from the waist down, was convicted in 2017 for waging an insurgency against the state. He has denied all the allegations against him. A court in Maharashtra state acquitted him in 2022, but India's top court has suspended the order and asked for a rehearing. On Tuesday, the Nagpur bench of the Bombay High Court acquitted Mr. Sai Baba and others and set aside their life sentences. A former professor at Delhi University, Mr. Sai Baba was first arrested in 2014 after he was accused of being a member of the outlawed Communist Party in India, Maoist. Maoist rebels said they are fighting for communist rule and rights for tribal people and rural poor. Mr. Sai Baba had traveled to tribal areas and permanently campaigned against the activities of Indian military and a pro-government anti-Maoist militia. But he denied any involvement with the Communist Party of India, Maoist. A local court, however, said in 2017 that he was guilty of a criminal conspiracy and waging war against the nation. In his verdict, the judge said that though he is physically handicapped, he is mentally fit and that the imprisonment for life is not a sufficient punishment to the accused. In 2022, the Bombay High Court cleared him of all charges, but the verdict was challenged by the Maharashtra government in the Supreme Court, which then suspended the order. The court said that the accused had been convicted of a very serious crime against the sovereignty and integrity of the country and that the High Court had not dealt with the facts of the case. Activists and human rights groups have criticized the wheelchair-bound activist's persistent arrest, calling it unjust. United Nations Special Rapporteur Mary Lawlor had called it an inhumane and senseless act that bore all the hallmarks of a state seeking to silence a critical voice. Singapore's Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong on Tuesday defended an exclusive deal his city-state struck with Taylor Swift that prevents the pop star taking her current Eras tour to anywhere else in Southeast Asia. Swift is performing 6 concerts from March 2nd to 9th in Singapore under an exclusive deal that has been criticized by some Southeast Asian neighbors who complain they have been deprived of the tourist boom that her concerts have brought elsewhere. Lee confirmed that Swift was provided with certain incentive from a government fund established to review tourism industry after COVID-19 disruptions to make Singapore her only Southeast Asian destination. He did not say how much the deal cost. He said he did not regard the deal as unfriendly towards his neighbors in the 10-country Association of Southeast Asian Nations. It has turned out to be a very successful arrangement. I don't see that as being unfriendly, Lee said in the Australian city of Melbourne, where he is attending an Asian Leaders Summit. Lee did not directly answer when asked if he had encountered bad blood among other leaders due to the deal. Singapore hadn't struck an exclusive deal. A neighboring country might have done so. Sometimes one country makes a deal, sometimes another country does. I don't explicitly say you will come here only on condition that you not go to other places, Lee said. Swift representatives did not immediately respond to a request for comment. Lee said he expected that Australia similarly made mutually acceptable, sensible agreements with Swift when she performed in Sydney and Melbourne before flying to Singapore. Lee said he didn't know what Australia's arrangements were. If that is what is needed to be done to get an outcome which is mutually beneficial and from which Singapore's point of view serves not just to grow the economy but also to bring in visitors and goodwill from all over the region, I don't see why not, Lee said. Real estate tycoon Triang Mylan faces the death penalty in a trial that began Tuesday over alleged fraud amounting to $12.5 billion, nearly 3% of the country's 2022 GDP and Vietnam's largest financial fraud case on record. The 66-year-old chair of the real estate company Van Ting Phath allegedly used thousands of ghost companies, paid bribes to government officials, and violated banking regulations, according to a government document. She is accused of illegally controlling the Saigon's joint stock commercial bank between 2012 to 2022 and using it to embezzle $12.5 billion, the document adds. Another 85 people are being prosecuted in connection, including a former State Bank of Vietnam official accused of accepting $5.2 million in bribes. Lan was arrested in October 2022 and could get a death sentence if found guilty. She was escorted to the court by the authorities at around 7 a.m. Her husband, Eric Chu Nap Ki, who works in real estate in Hong Kong, was also summoned, state media reported. VTP was among Vietnam's richest real estate firms, and its projects include luxury residential buildings, offices, hotels, and shopping centers. Lan's arrest, among the most high-profile in an ongoing anti-corruption drive in Vietnam that gained momentum since 2022, the so-called Blazing Furnace campaign has seen thousands of officials and business executives come under investigation. It reached the highest echelons of the Vietnamese government in January 2023 with the resignation of former President Nguyen Xuan Phuc and two deputy prime ministers for the political responsibility of corruption scandals during the pandemic. But analysts added that the anti-corruption drive has also dampened Vietnam's economic outlook and made foreign investors jittery at a time when the Southeast Asian nation has been positioning itself as the ideal home for businesses looking to shift their supply chains away from China. Thousands of Belarusians have been convicted on politically driven charges over the last 3 years as part of the authorities' relentless crackdown on dissent. The country's leading human rights group said Monday. The Vyazna Human Rights Center said that at least 4,690 people have been convicted on politically motivated charges since the August 2020 presidential election that fueled major protests, to which the authorities responded with brutal repressions. Vyazna's representative Pavel Sapelka noted that the number of people who face persecution on political motives could be higher, as the group doesn't know all the convicts' names. The largest repressive machine of the 21st century, created in the center of Europe, has been gaining steam, aimed at suppression of all freedoms, Sapelka said, adding that the scale of repression in Belarus is even broader than neighboring Russia. According to Vyazna, last year alone, at least 1,300 people faced criminal investigations on political grounds. Even a suspicion of disloyalty is enough to trigger political repressions, Sapelko said. Last month, authoritarian Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko cemented his 30-year rule in tightly controlled parliamentary and local elections, in which only loyalists were allowed to compete. The February 25th balloting was the first in Belarus since the contentious 2020 vote that handed Lukashenko his sixth term in office and sparked mass protests. The authorities responded with a sweeping crackdown in which more than 35,000 people were arrested and thousands beating in police custody. And hundreds of independent media outlets and non-governmental organizations were shut down and outlawed. Last month's balloting was held amid a brutal crackdown on dissent. More than 1,400 political prisoners remain behind bars, including leaders of opposition parties and renowned human rights advocate Ales Bialatski, who won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2022. Imprisoned opposition leaders have been held incommunicado, raising fears about their condition. Relatives of imprisoned Belarusian opposition figure Maria Kolesnikova, who is serving 11 years in prison for helping organize opposition protests, haven't heard from her for more than a year. Also, for more than a year, no one has seen or heard from Viktor Babarika, a presidential hopeful who sought to challenge Lukashenko in 2020 but was jailed and given a 14-year prison term, or about another opposition leader serving a 14-year sentence, Mykola Statkevich. Vyazna said that at least 5 political prisoners died in custody over the last 3 years. International Criminal Court prosecutors will present evidence to back up charges of war crimes against humanity against notorious fugitive Ugandan rebel leader Joseph Kony at the Global Court's first ever in absentia hearing later this year. The court announced Monday it will hold a so-called confirmation of charges hearing starting October 15 against Kony, the alleged leader of the Lord's Resistance Army, a brutal rebel group nearly 2 decades after first seeking his arrest. Kony faces 12 counts of crimes against humanity, including murder, sexual enslavement and rape, and 21 counts of war crimes, including cruel treatment of civilians, pillaging and enlisting child soldiers allegedly committed in 2003 and 2004 in northern Uganda. The hearing is not a trial, but allows prosecutors to outline their case in court. Kony, if he is not arrested before the hearing, He will be represented in his absence by a defense lawyer. If he is captured after the hearing, Kony will face a trial at the court based in The Hague. The LRA began its attacks in Uganda in the 1980s when Kony sought to overthrow the government. After being pushed out of Uganda, the militia terrorized villages in Congo, Central African Republic and South Sudan. It was notorious for using child soldiers, mutilating civilians and enslaving women. Kony was thrust into global spotlight in 2012 when a video about his crimes went viral. Despite the attention and international efforts to capture him, he remains at large. Last week, the ICC awarded reparations of more than 52 million euros to thousands of victims of Dominic Ongwen, a convicted commander in the Lord's Resistance Army. France has become the first country in the world to explicitly include the right to abortion in its constitution. Parliamentarians voted to revise the country's 1958 constitution to enshrine women's guaranteed freedom to abort. The overwhelming 780 to 72 votes saw a standing ovation in the parliament in Versailles. When the result was announced, President Emmanuel Macron described the move as French pride that had sent a universal message. However, anti-abortion groups have strongly criticized the change as has the Vatican. Abortion has been legal in France since 1975, but polls show around 85% of the public supported amending the constitution to protect the right to end a pregnancy. And while several other countries include reproductive rights in their constitutions, France is the first to explicitly state that an abortion will be guaranteed. It becomes the 25th amendment to modern France's founding document and the first since 2008. Following the vote, the Eiffel Tower in Paris was lit up in celebration with a message, "My body, my choice." Before the vote, Prime Minister Gabriel Attal told the Parliament that the right to abortion remained in danger and at the mercy of decision makers. "We are sending a message to all women: your body belongs to you and no one can decide for you," he added. The government has suffered 5 defeats in the House of Lords over its bills to revive its proposed Rwanda deportation scheme. The legislation will deem Rwanda a safe country to send asylum seekers to in a bid to stop removals being derailed by appeals. But peers backed changes to make it easier for judges to challenge this. They also said the treaty underpinning deportation must be fully implemented before flights take off. The bill will continue its passage through the Lords on Wednesday, when opposition peers could inflict further defeats. However, the government is likely to overturn these when it returns to the Commons, likely later this month. The bill is a key part of the government's plan to stop small boats crossing the English Channel, which Rishi Sunak has made a priority for his premiership. Ministers want flights to Rwanda to begin this spring. You are watching the international news on Atlantic Television Network.
From the line across the ocean to the land beyond the mountains, through the Sahara, we bring all the sport news, live analysis, expert discussions on trending stories in politics, business, socio-economy, sports, and documentaries. So catch all the updates on the happenings around the globe. Stay focused on the fact today, only on ATN.
People into the country illegally. That is amazing.
Honourable
You human trafficker.
Honourable
You are a human trafficker.
but
Every day, our lives are changed by history.
We are one people, all of us.
Leaders, politics,
Nobody's ambition is what the blood.
I have fought very firmly.
natural occurrence, war, and the world economy.
I belong to everybody, and I belong to nobody.
ATN covers it all on ATN Politics today.
Welcome back. This is the Atlantic News on Atlantic Television Network. Now the rest of our stories. The U.S. Supreme Court has temporarily blocked a severe Texas law that would allow police to arrest people suspected of crossing the border from Mexico. The law, if implemented, will be one of the toughest immigration laws passed by any U.S. state in modern history and could upend the relationship between the state and federal governments. Rights group and the Biden administration have sued to stop it. At the federal government's request, the top U.S. court put the law on hold. The law, known as SB 4, was originally due to come into force on Tuesday and would make border crossings illegal and punishable with jail time. It would also significantly increase the number of deportations. Under the legislation, local and state police officers would be allowed to make the stops and arrests except in schools and hospitals with more limited evidence. But it faced legal challenges, and last week a U.S. federal court ruled the law should be put on hold. Judge David Ezra ruled it was the federal government that, rather than individual states, that had jurisdiction over immigration matters. Texas appealed, and an appeals court temporarily suspended Judge Ezra's order over the weekend while it decided whether to allow the state's motion to move forward. But then a further legal development came on Monday, just a day before the law was due to come into effect, when the U.S. Justice Department asked the Supreme Court to intervene. Justice Samuel Alito decided to temporarily block the law until 13 March and has said Texas has until the end of next Monday to put its argument forward. The law could still come into force if the Supreme Court sides with Texas. The first ever over-the-counter birth control pill is now being shipped to U.S. pharmacies. The Food and Drug Administration last year approved the birth control pill to be available without a prescription to women of all ages. The agency said the move would reduce barriers to accessing contraception. Opioid's manufacturer said on Monday that the pill would be available in stores and online in the coming weeks for $19.99. Doctors say the Procigen-only pill, often known as the mini pill, is particularly safe from contraception. It's a safe form of contraception because it doesn't contain estrogen, meaning it has fewer side effects and health risks. The most common side effects of opioid include irregular bleeding, headaches, dizziness, and nausea. The U.S. is joining more than 100 countries around the world that have made the birth control pill available over the counter, including most countries in Latin America, as well as India, China, and the United Kingdom. The approval comes after an FDA expert advisory panel last May unanimously voted to recommend the pill be available over the counter. A key hearing over the future of Puerto Rico's crumbling power company and its staggering $9 billion debt began Monday in federal court following years of acrimonious talks between the U.S. territory's government and creditors seeking to recover their investment. The hearing, which is expected to last up to 2 weeks, will focus on a proposed debt restructuring plan. It comes nearly 7 years after Puerto Rico's government filed for the biggest bankruptcy in U.S. municipal history after announcing it was unable to pay its more than $73 billion debt following decades of corruption, mismanagement, and excessive borrowing. Scores of protesters gathered outside the courthouse before the hearing, decrying that power bills, already among the highest in a U.S. jurisdiction, would increase again if the plan is approved, leading to an even higher cost of living in the U.S. Caribbean territory. Every dollar we pay bondholders is a dollar that is not available for the energetic transformation that Puerto Rico urgently needs, Juan Rosario, who previously represented consumers on the power company's board, said before the hearing. The island of 3.2 million people is still struggling through chronic power outages more than 6 years after Hurricane Maria pummeled Puerto Rico as a powerful Category 4 storm, raising its electric grid. Officials have noted that aging infrastructure and lack of maintenance also is to blame, with Puerto Rico currently relying on generators from the federal government to help meet its energy needs. More than 800 people have objected to the debt restructuring plan in a document that lawyers filed in court, and more protests are expected. The plan was crafted by a federal control board appointed by U.S. Congress to oversee Puerto Rico's finances. In a meeting held days before the hearing, Robert Mujica, the board's executive director, called the plan fair and equitable. We believe it is confirmable, he said. That remains to be seen, with Judge Laura Taylor Swain on Monday hearing from an array of attorneys who have noted that the majority of creditors don't approve of the plan. Swain also is scheduled to hear from Puerto Rican retirees, business owners, and others on Tuesday. Previous debt restructuring plan have been scrapped in recent years, further inflaming already heated discussions between creditors and the government. The debt held by Puerto Rico's Electric Power Authority is the largest of any of the island government agencies and the only one that hasn't been restructured. Government officials have said that restructuring the debt is key to boosting Puerto Rico's economy and attracting new investors. The United States on Monday sanctioned Zimbabwe's President Emerson Mnangagwa, its First Lady, and other government officials for their alleged involvement in corruption and human rights abuses. The Treasury Department's Office of Foreign Assets Control imposed sanctions on 3 entities and 11 people, including the Mnangagwa's Vice President Constantino Chiwenga and retired Brigadier General Walter Temfumanei. Mnangagwa is accused of protecting gold and diamond smugglers who operate in Zimbabwe, directing government officials to facilitate the sale of gold and diamonds in illicit markets and taking bribes in exchange for his services, among other offenses. President Joe Biden also Monday signed an executive order that terminates Zimbabwe's national emergency and revokes Zimbabwe's specific sanctions. Now the administration is using a Trump-era executive order that implements the Global Magnitsky Human Rights Accountability Act as its authority to issue sanctions. Treasury Deputy Secretary Wale Adeyemo says the changes to Zimbabwe's sanctions regime are intended to make clear what has always been true. Our sanctions are not intended to target the people of Zimbabwe. Today, we are refocusing our sanctions on clear and specific targets, President Mnangagwa's criminal network of government officials and business people who are most responsible for corruption or human rights abuse against the people of Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe's government spokesman, Nick Mnangagwa, tweeted in response to the sanctions that as long as senior leadership is under sanctions, we all are under sanctions. And as long as members of corporate Zimbabwe are under sanctions, we are under sanctions. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said in a statement that the designation are part of a stronger, more targeted sanctions policy towards Zimbabwe the United States is implementing. Key individuals, including members of the government of Zimbabwe, bear responsibility for these actions, including the looting of government coffers that rob Zimbabweans of public resources, he said. Mnangagwa has sworn in for a second term as Zimbabwe's president last September. Migrants bound for the U.S. are once again crossing the Darien Gap in large numbers, officials in Colombia said on Monday, after being stranded for much of last week in a small town along the country's Caribbean coast due to a work stoppage by local boat captains. Johan Wachter Espitia, deputy mayor of Nicole, said that 3,000 migrants have left the town since Friday on boats headed towards the Darien jungle, with another 400 people waiting and sleeping in tents as they gather money to pay for their tickets. From Nicole, migrants board boats that take them to two remote villages where the treacherous trails that cross the Darien Gap begin. The dense and roadless rainforest divides South America from Central America, and in recent years it has become a common yet perilous route for hundreds of thousands of South Americans, Asians, and Africans headed to the United States from Monday to Thursday of last week. Transit across the Darien dwindled as boat companies in Nicole went on strike over the arrest of 2 of their boat captains by Colombia's Navy. The captains had been intercepted after they left Nicole in 2 boats carrying around 150 migrants and were accused by authorities of transporting migrants in unsafe conditions and of contributing to human trafficking. The 2 companies operating boat services from Nikolai towards the Darien Gap stopped their services in protest for 4 days. They resumed activities on Friday after holding several meetings with municipal and national government officials who were concerned over the large numbers of migrants stranded in the small town, according to Colombia's human rights ombudsman. Around 8,000 migrants were stranded in Nikolai by Thursday, generating the potential for a public health crisis. According to Wachter Espitia, the companies agreed to a request that migrants boarding their boats register on a government app. More details on the condition for transporting migrants will be discussed in another meeting later this week, he said. Colombia has long allowed migrants from different nations to transit through its territory without visas, but the South American nation has come under increasing pressure from U.S. officials to stem the flow of migrants headed north as record members of people seek asylum at the U.S. border. Last year, 520,000 people crossed the Darien Gap on foot according to authorities in Panama, where most migrants register with officials in villages on the northern side of the jungle before they continue their journey to the United States. Haiti's government declared a 72-hour state of emergency on Sunday after armed gangs stormed the major prison. At least 12 people were killed and about 3,700 inmates escaped in the jailbreak. Gang leaders are demanding the resignation of Prime Minister Ariel Henry, whose whereabouts are unknown since he traveled to Kenya. Gangs control about 80% of the capital, Port-au-Prince. Gang violence has plagued Haiti for years. A government statement said 2 prisons, one in Port-au-Prince and the other in nearby Cross the Bouquet, were stormed over the weekend. It said the acts of disobedience were a threat to national security and said it was instituting an immediate nighttime curfew in response, which started at 2000 local time. Haitian media reported that police stations were attacked, distracting authorities before the coordinated assault on the jails. Speaking to the BBC from Haiti, Serge Delaxis from International Rescue Committee said that many police stations were under gang control on Friday, with many police killed over the weekend. Among those detained in Port-au-Prince were suspects charged in connection with the 2021 killing of President Jovenel Moïse. Gang violence has further escalated since his assassination in 2021. Mr. Moïse has not been replaced and presidential elections have not been held since 2016. And that is the international news for today. Before we go, another look at the major stories. From Ghana, Finance Ministry urged President not to sign anti-LGBT bill. From Israel, UN conclude there was sexual violence during Hamas attacks. From China, government sets economic growth target of 5%. From France, government becomes first to include abortion in constitution. From United States, Supreme Court temporarily blocks Texas anti-immigration law. From Haiti, government declares 72-hour state of emergency. I am Valentina Lawrence. Thank you for watching. You can follow us on all our social media platforms: X Atlantic TV Net, Facebook and YouTube Atlantic Television Network, Instagram Atlantic TV Network, or you can watch us live on our website atlanticnetwork.tv. Do remember that peace and unity are the pathways to progress. Thank you for watching. Have a lovely afternoon.
From the line across the ocean to the land beyond the mountains, through the Sahara, we bring all sport news, live analysis, expert discussions on trending stories in politics, business, socio-economy, sports, and documentaries. So catch all the updates on the happenings around the globe. Stay focused on the fact today, only on ATN.
People into the country illegally. That is amazing.
Honorable
You human trafficker.
Honorable They are not picking our calls. They made up their minds.
So no agreement with the EU, but